Okay, so hopefully we've made it through fractions and we're now ready to start taking a look at some other topics in mathematics. So congratulations if you made it through fractions. Maybe you're already good at them, who knows? But one, and this is kind of a standalone lesson, although you're going to get some other things explained during this about fractions, decimals, and percents. But one of the things that you need to be able to do in mathematics, especially on the HISET test, is you need to be able to put numbers in the form that is most useful for you when you're doing your problems. So sometimes fractions are exactly what we want. We just want to keep things as fractions. Sometimes it's easier to convert them into decimal numbers, and sometimes you actually want to solve things in terms of percentages. Especially for graphing, a lot of times there's going to be graphs. Circle graphs are one beautiful example where everything is given to you in percentages. And sometimes they might ask you, well, how many actual people does this percent of the circle graph represent? So you need to understand how to go back and forth from any one of these three types of numbers into the other two. Ooh. Now, excuse me. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with each one of them at least once, and then we're going to do a lot of the common ones. The common ones are ones that you might be able to memorize. So we're going to start with something that's relatively easy. We'll start with a fraction. We're going to start with 1/4. Okay, so to go from a fraction to a decimal or a fraction to a percent is very simple, okay? We kind of already know what this is. If you know what a quarter is worth, if you have one in your pocket and you're going to go spend some money, you already know what the decimal is. But how do you get there? Well, I'm going to remind you of something. A fraction is basically a bar with a number on top and a number on the bottom. And yes, you are correct. That looks exactly like the sign for division. And what's happening right here with a 1/4, another way to say that is 1 divided by 4. So if you take your calculator, you should get your calculator, okay? Pause the video if you need to, but go get your calculator. Rewind if you need. Do 1 divided by 4. So you put in 1, hit the divided by sign, and hit 4, and then hit the enter key. And it gives you a decimal. It says it's 0.25. Huh, so 1/4 is 25 cents, 0.25 of a dollar is 25 cents. Okay, well, we know that's right because we know how to spend money, but does that really make any sense? Well, we're going to get into something about decimals, about how to read them correctly. So in decimals, the first space in the decimal is the 10th. So this is 2/10, all right, because it's in the first space. The second space in a decimal is the 100th place, HUNDREDTH, the 100th place. So to go back from a decimal to a fraction to check to see if we have it right, all you have to do is read the decimal. So 25 is 25, so you say the number, and then you say the last place that has a number. So it's 25 hundredths. And if you write that as a fraction, you would get 25/100. If you reduce that and divide 25 by 25, you get 1. If you divide 100 by 25, you get 4. So these are the same number. They are the same number. They are equal. 1/4 is 25 hundredths. These are the same thing. Okay. So, sorry. So when we're going from a decimal to a percent, all we have to do is read the word percent. Percent means out of is per, and cent is 100. So percent means out of 100. So if we already know we have 25 hundredths, that means we have 25 over 100. Well, that's 25%. And one of the nice things is decimals and percents, they're always going to use the same numbers. This one is going to have a decimal place in front of what over here is like the tens place. So 25 hundredths, 25 over 100. There's one more way to find percent. I'm going to erase some of this stuff so we have some room. Another way to find percent that can be very useful is by using what's called the percent proportion. If you want to get 1/4 to be something over 100, there is a thing that you can do because these two fractions are set up to be equal. And what you can do is you can cross multiply the two numbers that are diagonal. So 1 times 100 would be 100. So you multiply across and then you divide by the number that's left. And what you will get if you do 1 times 100, hit enter, you get 100. Divided by 4, you get 25. And that is percent because it's over 100. So when we don't have a nice number that is quite this easy to use, we can set it up and cross multiply, divide, and actually get our missing piece of information there. That works all the time as long as these two fractions are equal. Okay, so we've taken a fraction and we've made it into a decimal and we made it into a percent. Let's take another fraction. Let's take something different. Let's take 2/5. And this time let's do the percentage first. So two ways you could do this. You can take 2/5. You can set it equal to some number over 100. Now this time you would go 2 times 100. So 2 times 100, divide by the leftover number, so divided by 5, and that's going to give you x. So 2 times 100 is 200. 200 divided by 5 is 40. And 2/5 is 40%. All right, not too bad. The other way that we could have done it, we could have gotten the decimal first. The easiest way to get the decimal is go 2 divided by 5 on your calculator. So you grab your calculator, clear it, go 2 divided by 5, enter. I don't know if you can see that. Probably not. Probably won't focus on it too well, but it's 0.4. So 0.4 is 4/10. And that's perfectly fine. That's a good answer for decimal. If you wanted to make it a percent, you could put a 0 there. Now it's 40 hundredths, which is 40%. All right, one last one with a fraction. Let's try one that's a little different. Let's go with 7/8. Okay. Now we could go decimal first or percent first. It doesn't make any difference. So let's do decimal first. Go 7 divided by 8. If you want to pause to get ahead of me, that's fine. 7 divided by 8, enter. This time you get a 3-digit answer. It's 0.875, which is 875 thousandths, because the third place is thousandths. THS, anything with a TH. All right, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, it's a decimal place. 875 thousandths. To make that a percent, if you notice, this number and this number, the only difference is this decimal point has moved over 2 places. From 0.40 to 40, this decimal point would have to move over 2 places to become here. And once it's there, we don't need it. In this case, though, when we move it over 2 places, we would get 87.5% out of 100%. Okay, so decimal to percent, multiply by 100. Well, that means from percent to decimal, you can just divide by 100. So if you're going this way, just multiply by 100. If you're going this way, divide by 100. It is really that easy. It is really that easy. It goes back and forth. Okay, so that's starting with fractions. Maybe it's harder if we start with decimals. No, it's not. It really isn't. So let's start with a decimal. We'll do 0.35. Well, if you can read decimal places, then you already have your percent, because this is 35 hundredths, which means it's 35 over 100, which is 35%. Done. 0.35, 35%. Fraction, however, well, we already have a fraction, 35 over 100, right? But here is where fractions have a little bit extra to them. You need to reduce it. Now, if you put it in your calculator and hit enter, it will reduce it for you, which is kind of cool. But we can also look at this, and we know that 5 is going to divide here, and 5 is also going to divide into 100. So 35 divided by 5 is 7. 100 divided by 5 is 20. And your final answer for your fraction is going to be 7 over 20, because you need to reduce it if you can. All right. Let's try something that's a little weird. What if you have a decimal that has a whole number and you need to make it into a fraction or a percent? Well, it's the same thing. 2 is just a whole number. So if we want to go from decimal to percent, you can just multiply by 100 and just move that decimal over 2 places. It would be 208%. It's over 100 because this is more than 1. Over here, it's 2 8/100ths, if you read it correctly, which would be 2 as a whole number and 8/100ths, which is exactly how I read it, 2 and, the decimal point is and, 2 8/100ths, because it's in the hundredths place. And then that's going to reduce. The 8 and the 100 are both going to divide by, well, let's divide them by 2 first, and we'll make it into 4 over 50. Then we realize we can still go, divide by 2 again, and we get 2 over 25. So our final answer for this is going to be 2 2/25, because it can't reduce anymore. So it is possible to have a whole number. It really doesn't change much. But if you have a whole number, it's more than 100%, and it's more than just a fraction. Okay, one more for a decimal. We kind of did one, but let's go ahead and just do a decimal without anything in the tens. I can't make it any harder. Like, this is it. So to get this into a percent, you could say, well, it's 9/100ths. And you could write 9 over 100, which is 9%. Or you could just take your decimal and move it over 2 spots, and you could say it's 9%. To make it a fraction, we just said it was 9/100ths. So we're going to put 9 over 100. And 100 doesn't divide by 3. That's the only thing that really goes into a 9 other than 9. So we're done. That's your final answer, 9 over 100. Okay, maybe it's hard if we start with a percentage. Maybe it's hard. I don't know. Let's find out. So let's start with 45%. Well, 45% means 45 over 100, correct? Because the word percent, remember, means over 100. So percent over 100. So we already have our fraction. We just have to put 45 over 100. Yeah, but then you got to reduce. Okay. So what's a number that goes into 45 that also goes into 100? Well, you might see the 5 and the 0 and know that 5 divides into both. So 45 will divide by 5 and become a 9. 100 will divide by 5 and become a 20. And we're done. Okay. 45 over 100 is the same as 45/100ths. So here we can go from percent to decimal. Now we're moving over this way 2 spots and putting a decimal point. Okay, so to go from a percent to a decimal, you're just moving over 2 spots, or to do this, you are dividing by 100. So if you do 45 divide by 100, you'll get 0.45. You would get that number. So percent to decimal divide by 100. Remember, the numbers are always going to be the same for these two. This one, not necessarily, because it reduces. Okay, so percent, let's try another percent. Let's try one that we are good at. 50%. Everybody loves 50%, right? Half off. That's half. Oh, wait a minute. That's half. How is that half? Let's hold on. Let's make it into a decimal first this time. So 50%, if you move it over 2 spots, would be 0.50, or you could just do decimal 0.5. So it's either 50 hundredths. So you're either writing 50 hundredths, or you're writing 5/10. Well, I'm going to use the 5/10 and put it over here because it's easier. Why not? 5/10 reduces. Divide by 5 is 1, divide by 5 is 2. Ah, okay, there you go. So 50% is 1/2 as a fraction. One more time, these are all the exact same representation. No, I'm sorry, same number, different way to represent them. Okay, so they look different, but a half as a fraction is 50% as a percent, and it's 5/10 or 50 hundredths as a decimal. These are all the same value. Last one, let's do 100. We'll do 130%. All right, 130%. What's that going to look like? Well, if you divide it by 100, it's 1.30, or 1.3, because that 0 doesn't matter. If you read this correctly, it's 1 and, the decimal point is the and, right there, there's your and, 1 and 3, and it's in the tenths place. So 1 and 3 tenths, and you can't reduce it. You're done. All right, so that was my little explanation of fractions, decimals, and percents, and how to take them from one to the other and the other back. Really, really important skill. It's important to use, and use it all the time in real life. So for now, that is going to be where we're going to stop. We'll pick it up with some percentage questions almost for sure. See ya.